and good afternoon or good evening, depending where you're joining us from today. And welcome to this AAA InFocus webinar support for the June 2025 exams. My name is Hazel McLucas and I am an Education Partner Support Manager at ACCA. Our session, Manage Your Approach, Master Exam Strategy, is designed to help you with upcoming exam preparation, and today Afaf Noor has joined us to impart her AAA knowledge. During the session, Afaf will showcase how to present exam answers effectively for higher marks using examples. She'll also share her insights on common student challenges, important tips, and answers to questions frequently asked by students. And there will also be a live Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So as the title suggests, this session is an opportunity to learn the exam approach and design your strategy in a way that can maximise your preparation for the June 25 exams. Before I hand over to Afaf, I'd just like to quickly cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, there are a number of buttons that you can use. So there's a help icon, which will provide resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues that you might experience. There's also icons for both the slides and the media player, and you'll need both of these throughout the webinar, so please make sure you've got them selected and you can see them on screen. You'll also see an attendee chat where I can see a number of people are saying where they're joining us from today, and you can engage with each other on there. But it is very important that you do not share your personal information in that chat. And also we have a resource list, which is an icon that looks like a file symbol. And if you click on this, you'll be able to access resources relevant to today's webinars, including some direct links. You can rearrange your screen to suit and resize the windows if you need to. And at any point, if you can't hear what's been said or see any of the visuals, then please refresh your browser. Registering for today's webinar means you'll be sent an email tomorrow with details on how you can listen to it again. So don't worry if you miss something or you have technical issues, you'll be able to access the recording. I'm going to hand over to Afaf in a moment and I'll be back with you towards the end of the session. But if you'd like to ask Afaf or ACCA a question, then please post them on the Q&A section that's on your screen. Please note we can't guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or in the web chat, but we really hope that the questions we share will be helpful to everyone that's on today. So now I'll pass to Afaf.
Thank you so much, Hazel. So hi, everyone, and good afternoon, evening, wherever you're joining from. I'm just going to confirm I can change the slides. I was just making sure I was. So like Hazel said, we are going to be looking at a number of very interesting things today. Now, whether you're taking the AAA exam for the first time or you're a research student, you would know that it's very rare that you would see a question from the AAA exam and say, I don't have the knowledge to do this. It's primarily, I know what the answer is, or if you're a research student, I did know the exam, yet I was not able to pass. So we are going to focus on the presentation and the exam techniques for topics which are frequently tested and some of the topics which are always there. So we're going to be starting off with that. Now, in the past couple of sessions or webinars that we've had for advanced audit assurance, we weren't able to always answer all the questions. So what we did was we identified the frequently asked questions or the commonly discussed challenges. So I am going to be talking about some of those. And after all of this, if you still have questions, you would have an opportunity to ask them in the live Q&A. And I hope you do have quite a few questions. I'd be happy to answer as many as I potentially can. Now, with that in mind, we're going to be starting off with the first session, which is presenting your answers effectively. Now, this is something that I'd want you to sort of imagine that you're doing in the exam. So you have 3 hours, 15 minutes for your exam. And again, every tutor has a different recommendation. But I always recommend that you should start off by reading the case study and allocate the 15-minute reading time to the case study as well. Questions 2 and 3, you can always come back to it when it's time to actually start typing up the answers. They are shorter scenarios, they won't take you that long. So suppose I've read through the case study. It took me about, say, 15, 20 minutes to read through the information given in question number 1. I've reading information from exhibit 1. I know exactly what the requirements are, and I know how to manage my time. Now, the minute I open up my response area, within the next 1 or 1.5 minutes, you could get some very easy marks. So always start off with setting the format or the template for briefing notes. So the AAA examiner always asks for your answer to be in the format of briefing notes. So write to, from, subject, fill that out. In the introduction, just summarize the requirements. So something very simple, nothing fancy. These briefing notes begin with an evaluation of business risk. We'll then discuss risk of material misstatement, procedures on goodwill, and ethical issues. So literally typing up this information would get you your first mark. This is your first professional skill mark on communication. And then for the rest of the questions or the parts within question number 1, all you have to do is answer the requirement, follow the instructions that are there by the examiner, write in short sentences, not SMS or texting language, but short, complete sentences, and you get another 2 communication marks. So out of the 50-mark case study, you have absolutely no extra effort that needs to be put in for getting these 3 marks. So out of the 50, these 3 marks are done without me putting in any additional effort whatsoever. So I started off by explaining the to, from, subject and the introduction. I'm now going to move on to a topic which is quite frequently tested. It's not there every single time, but it is there quite frequently, which is business risk. So we know, and I'm sure you know this already, but just remember, if it's an 8 or a 10-mark requirement, you should be aiming at getting about 5 business risks for a 10-mark requirement. So it's always 2 marks per well-evaluated risk. And now this is where the gap is. I would pick up a risk from the scenario, potentially a breach of law. I would say the risk is that the company might be facing fines which could lead to a cash outflow, full stop. And then I would think that I've gotten the 2 marks. That is not true. For business risk, you have to make sure you evaluate the risk rather than simply type up the initial implication. Now, for that, remember, when I'm reading the case study for a business risk answer, I have to continuously think like the management. So do not think about the financial statements at all. This answer has to be entirely from the management's or the business's perspective. So based on the information that is given in the scenario, what are the problems that the management could face? And if I'm very honest, every problem is going to be either a reduction in profitability or cash flows, right? So at the end of the day, it's a for-profit organization. We're looking at profit or cash. So I have to sort of devise my answer based on problems related to cash flows, profitability, or reputation, which would in any case indirectly affect my profitability and cash flows. So when I read the question or when I start typing up the answer, identification and implication is my first mark. So identification is a potential breach of law. Implication is the first impact that comes to my mind. So fines and therefore a reduction in profitability. Now, this could happen for any company. If it's a manufacturing company or a service organization, if there's a breach, the implication would be cash outflow due to fines. I have gotten my first mark. I haven't gotten the second evaluation mark. And remember, the second evaluation mark is often linked to my additional professional skills mark as well. So in evaluating a business risk, you have to link that problem to something else in the case study, or maybe think of another implication for this. So I keep saying breach because that's a very commonly tested business risk. My evaluation could be I've seen the financial information extract, and I know they're already struggling in terms of liquidity because their cash has gone down by 7%. And that's it. That's my second mark. So when I evaluate the risk, it is basically me trying to explain to the examiner why this risk is particularly important for this particular client. So don't just stop at your initial implication, because normally what you might do is for a 10-mark question, you'd write 5 risks with just the implication, and you would think you're getting like 7, 8 marks, but you wouldn't really be doing that in the actual exam. So remember, for your evaluation, it has to be linked to something else. There was this very interesting another question that has come up quite a lot. They had plans for expansion. And, of course, when you plan on doing something new, the initial risk is it going to be successful, which is amazing for my implication. But then again, I went on to read the other information and I could see they were struggling with almost everything. And then my evaluation is this seems a bit optimistic because they're already struggling with reduced sales. They don't seem to have a lot of cash. So where are they going to get this money from? So evaluation has to be something more than the initial impact that this problem would have for the business. So for business risk questions, remember I started off with 2 from subject introduction. I wrote part A. I gave each business risk a heading. I evaluated the risk, and I know if it's a well-evaluated risk, I'm automatically getting some professional skills marks as well. There's nothing extra that you have to do for the professional skills marks. And then I'm going to sort of apply this to an example. So again, this is something you might see in your past exams quite a bit. The group has made its first acquisition. This is me pretty much copying words from the scenario. This is not getting me any marks in AAA at all. The risk is, the initial implication is, the return on investment might not be what I expected. And this is particularly a bigger problem for the scenario because it says in the question, this decision was made very quickly without due diligence. So now this time around, in this example of evaluation, I haven't really thought anything extra. I just linked it to another piece of information from the scenario. So you get your 2 evaluation marks and you can move on to your next part. So very simple to manage your time if you know that these are the 3 steps I have to follow. Identify, implication, and then evaluation. So I'm done with part A. I am going to be talking about part B, which is audit risk. I would just like to quickly point out, because this has been asked frequently, the difference between audit risk and a risk of material misstatement question. Remember, audit risk has 2 elements, risk of material misstatement and detection risk. So if the requirement is audit risk, you can write both. But if the requirement is risk of material misstatement, then you get no marks for talking about detection risks anywhere in the question. So just to sort of recap your assumed knowledge from AA. Now, again, I'm starting my audit risk question. Within the next 1 minute, I'm going to get 3 marks. Remember my 3 communication marks, and now these 3 materiality marks are going to get me to 6 out of 50 without putting too much effort into this. You will always be given the benchmark to use in Exhibit 1, which basically are your requirements. Please do not use your own benchmark. It would either be revenue or profit or total assets, whatever the amount is. You are going to make sure you use your highlight tool in the exam to sort of identify which benchmark I'm going to be using. I'm then going to explain and calculate the lower limit and the upper limit. So suppose in Exhibit 1, they had said profit before tax is to be used as my benchmark. Can I also quickly point out, please make sure you take the PBT for this year, not the comparatives. In a hurry, sometimes we might just take the previous year's figures. That means a 0 out of 3. So be very careful about this, right? So current year, the year that you're auditing, I'm going to pick up the PBT figure, 1 mark for 5%, another mark for 10%. So just very quickly, for revenue, it is half to 1%. You can also use 1 to 2%. For profit before tax, it's 5 to 10. And for total assets, it's 1 to 2%. So I'm just going to get my first 2 marks for basically doing the calculations and following the partner's instructions, not making up my own benchmark. Now, the third mark is sometimes, well, no, not sometimes, most of the time, you might actually think I'm getting that mark, but in reality, you aren't. Quite a few of you might actually write, I'm choosing 5% because there are risks in the question. Unfortunately, that's a 0. It is a risk question. Of course, there are risks. You have to give a justification, and there's nothing extra that you have to do. Just use 1 or 2 examples from the scenario. Remember, you've already spent about 15 minutes reading the case study. So you know on top of your head, there are 2 risks, maybe about regarding impairment or regarding a provision. So my justification is I'm using the lower threshold or the lower end because there are significant risks related to impairment and new acquisition. In my example, I've just literally written one, which is the risk is increased because of the new acquisition. So please remember, and you can sort of, understand this when you read the examiner's model answers as well. So the third mark is for justifying why you're choosing a lower percentage. Another thing that I want to point out, please only use either the lower one or the mid-range. Do not select a higher range. It's a risk question. You cannot justify choosing the 10%. So even if you're thinking this is an old client, but it's a risk question, that means there are risks related to this. So only either 5% or 7.5%, that's really it for profit before tax. So again, I've gotten my 3 marks and I'm quite confident that I can go on and cover the rest of the question. So now you're going to be actually following the answering technique. And this is where I'm going to spend a bit more time, mainly because there's a huge gap in understanding how to get the professional skills marks in a ROM question. Now, ROM has a template or an answering technique that I want you to keep in mind as you start writing down the answer. I have selected my materiality. I do not need to do another calculation. If you do another calculation for materiality, you're going to lose marks. So you're simply going to say, whatever the amount that you've picked up, this is material based on the benchmark that I've decided. So I'm not saying no calculation at all. Don't say this is 6% of PBT. You lose this mark otherwise. So I'm starting off by saying, because there was an amount given in the scenario, maybe it was repairs and maintenance, property, plant, and equipment. It was 144 million. So I'll simply say 144 million is material based on my chosen materiality. So for every risk, if there's an amount given, you can start off with this. Please also remember, there might be some issues which are material by nature. So if it relates to a related party transaction, if it relates to a disclosure which has uncertainty, if it relates to an accounting policy that has changed, such areas are not only material by, might not only be material by amount, they're also material by nature. So just keep that in mind as you evaluate materiality. Then you have to explain the relevant accounting treatment. This again is very important. Suppose it's a question, like I said earlier, this comes up quite frequently, IAS 16, capital and revenue expenditure. Only explain this part. So capital expenditure when, enhanced economic benefits, etc., otherwise you expense off. So whatever your accounting treatment is, it doesn't have to be technical, it doesn't have to be fancy. You do not need to write the IAS 16 number or name. You just have to explain the accounting treatment that should have been followed. And this is the area that I wanted to spend more time on. You have to think of the risks to that accounting treatment. So it's not just about, most of you would say, the risk is this has been incorrectly capitalized, which is correct for only half a mark. For more professional skills and technical marks, you need to step back, think about your accounting treatment, and focus on areas which might be subject to bias, which might have management judgment, or which might be complex. I'll just quickly give you like a run through of common examples. In new acquisitions, when we talk about goodwill, the fair value has uncertainty, judgment, and bias. These are three separate points. Write them separately. The risk is fair value has been incorrectly determined because it's based on management judgment and therefore it could have bias in it. Again, when we talk about impairment, your fair value and value in use both have all of these elements. When we talk about any allowance or provision, all of them have all of these elements. So when you're typing up the answer, if you haven't done the mock exam yet, the one ACCA has released, even when you're doing the mock exam, just keep this in mind that if I've said, when I'm evaluating each risk, I can't just write one point to say the risk is this is incorrectly done. I have to think about the accounting treatment and I have to see if I can add more to it based on the 4 factors that are there. This is not for AAA, by the way, but just from AA, these are inherent risk factors. So you did this as straightforward knowledge in AA. You are now expected to apply this in advanced audit and assurance. So based on this evaluation, my concern is that these areas of the financial statements could be under or overstated. It could be a number or a double entry, or it could be a disclosure. Another thing that I wanted to point out is, for example, if you're talking about goodwill, don't just say assets are overstated. Unfortunately, that's a 0. You have to be more specific and say either goodwill or intangible assets. So in a hurry, we would normally write for everything, we'd write assets overstated and profit overstated. I'm happy to give you the profit mark because that's okay. But for assets, you have to be more specific. For liabilities, talk to me about which liability are you concerned about. So when you're explaining the impact on financial statements, remember that is why you were basically hired, right? As external auditors, you're looking for double entries, which could be incorrect, and you're looking for disclosures, which could be either inadequate or completely missing. So my entire risk of materials misstatement flows in the sequence that we follow in practical life as well. Is it material? What do the accounting standards say about this? What are my concerns regarding the accounting treatment? And ultimately, if this is not sorted out, what is the impact on the financial statements? So like the template or the answering technique that you follow for this. So I'm just going to step back for a second, covering the easy marks. I've covered the 2 from subject. Suppose there was no BR in my requirement at all. It was just an audit risk question. I started off with materiality, the 3 marks. I am then, for each risk of material misstatement, I'm covering the format that is over here. Another thing that I want to add over here is you can get up to 3 marks for analytical procedures within this format. So you know where it says the risk? You can actually support the risk by talking about percentage change or a ratio. So if your concern is that assets might have been incorrectly capitalized in property, plant, and equipment, you can say, because I have extracts given, I can say this is reflected in the fact that property, plant, and equipment has increased by 7%. So please remember, a lot of you might actually think I'm just going to start off with doing all the ratio calculations and percentage changes and then go on to do my risk evaluation separately. It's not going to work. You do get your calculation marks for percentage change or analytical procedures, but only if it is linked to a valid risk. So every time I start an evaluation, I'm going to look at the numbers if I can support the evaluation or the risk with some numbers as well. Okay, so another very important point that is normally forgotten is that was the format for, when you talk about accounting treatments and under overstatement. Now, in most risk questions, there are some easy marks for control risks that students normally forget to get. It's not that it's not well done, they just forget. So, anywhere in the question, and I'm giving you hints about commonly used phrases. If anywhere in the question there's a concern about a system which is either new or maybe is deficient or crashed, then there are marks for talking about control risk. More frequently tested are corporate governance deficiencies. So the examiner would sneak in a deficiency like the audit committee does not have an individual with finance experience, or the board has 7 executive directors or 2 non executive directors. And we keep thinking, I'm not concerned, that's a business risk problem. It's not. It basically, the weak control environment converts into a control risk, and you have to explain. So use the word control risk and then say the risk is because of this system weakness, there could be fraud and error in this area or in the financial statements. So be alert to control risks as you come up with the answer. So I'm now very confident about how my ROM question is going to flow. I'm not done yet. Another 2 marks that the examining team is willing to hand over to you on a golden plate is for prioritizing risks. And again, trust me when I say there's nothing extra that needs to be done. I've completed my risk format using the techniques I just told you. Pick up 2 risks which had highest numbers plus which had some element of uncertainty, judgment, or bias, and put them in your conclusion. I'm not talking about the conclusion to the briefing notes. I'm talking about the conclusion to part B, which was my risk question. So I am going to say that goodwill is the most significant because not only is it material by amount, but it involves significant judgment. And the second most significant is impairment because it's material by amount and it has management bias. So if you are simply saying this risk is prioritized because it is material, unfortunately, that's a 0. It is a question on risk of material misstatement. Of course, it's material. So at the end, 2 risks, don't do anything else. Justify it. The and is in bold by saying it's material and then just give one more answer. And the answer is from the risk evaluation that you've just done. So you're not really, putting any extra effort in this. So again, following a format that helps you put the entire answer in a particular flow. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but sometimes either as part C or as a completely different question entirely, you might be asked to justify a significant risk of material misstatement. So the examiner will tell you what the risks are, and you have to justify why they are significant. It is exactly the same answering technique as ROM. Just remember, all you have to do is, in your justification, talk about the risk factors that I discussed earlier. So same materiality, accounting treatment, but in the risk portion, there are more marks for talking about the fact that this is significant because of uncertainty, judgment, bias, or complexities. So this is something the examiner has mentioned in her report quite a few times. It's not a different topic, it's the same technique with just more marks in your evaluation of your risk or your risk assessment. We then have part C. So normally when you have a business risk and then a ROM question, this would be part C for procedures, but either way, you will always see procedures in your risk question. Now, normally it is around the risks that you've already discussed. So design audit procedures based on maybe goodwill for part 1 and impairment for part 2. It is always 1 mark per procedure. Remember, as you write down your answer, you have to write the source and the purpose. So what are you inspecting and why? What are you discussing and why? What are you recalculating and why? So don't just write inspect the contract or review the minutes of meetings of the directors or review the non-current asset register. You have to tell me what you're confirming from that evidence. Another very important thing, because this is how you get your professional skills marks. Another very important thing is as you design your procedures, please remember if I simply write things like management discussion or written representations or board minutes, these are all internally generated evidence and they are weaker in quality. They need to be supported by better quality evidence. So, particularly areas in goodwill and impairment, which require judgment, I need to have third party evidence. So, for fair values, I need to get market research results, or maybe I need to use an expert. For value in use, when I'm evaluating the appropriateness of assumptions that the management have made, I need to compare it with my own understanding of the business and of the external atmosphere or environment as well. So don't just focus on this because not only will you lose the technical marks, you're quite likely to lose the professional skills marks as well if you don't focus on better quality evidence. We're now again going to be looking at the way to design procedures. Quite a few times I've been asked, do I need to learn anything for procedures? The answer is absolutely not. Yes, you need to have sound accounting knowledge because when we talk about procedures, we have to confirm the accounting knowledge and the information given in the scenario through some procedures. So, a list of ideas, I'm not going to go through these, but whatever is given in the scenario and my accounting treatment, which was carrying value and recoverable amount for impairment, I am going to see if I can confirm this by inspecting documents, by third-party evidence, any numbers that can be recalculated. If it's an estimate, then I need to evaluate the basis of assumptions. For estimates, my subsequent event review would also help. So accounting treatment and information given in the scenario on one side and this list on the other side, and you're going to bring the two together. Now, as an example, I wanted to pick up something from a recently published past exam, which was an area that learners struggled with. Now, I'm just going to take this step by step, and then I'll show you how this can be linked to what I've just spoken about. So they had oil and gas platforms that they have classified as property, plant, and equipment. This is all given in the scenario, by the way. They mentioned that they have a carrying value of this much, and each is a separate cash generating unit. And they are telling you that an annual impairment review is conducted. Now, very important, none of my knowledge-based testing is going to be applied here. It has to be all very technique-based. In the question, it says it is difficult to get the market value, and therefore, in my impairment testing, I'm just comparing the carrying amount to the value in use. So, impairment, carrying value, recoverable amount, higher of fair value and value in use. They are saying, the management says, we can't look at the fair value, so entire testing has been focused on value in use. So I'm now highlighting the information that is given. Now, in value in use, you have future revenues, and they have estimated those based on long-term revenue predictions. So again, I'm going to audit each part of this. The costs are based on average operating and capital costs after adjusting for predicted inflation rates. So lots of estimates and predictions and uncertainty here. And they have discounted this at the rate of 1.5%. Now, if you've done your past exams, you can see this is from one of the recent ones. I need to design procedures on this. Again, and they had more information about the fact that they had latest reviews and there were impairment reversals as well. Now, I am going to design procedures to cover each element. They mentioned the carrying value. I'd confirm this from the register. They are saying they actually prepare an annual impairment review. I need to test the process through which this impairment review was done. So test the controls on preparing this review because it's done as a routine. They are saying it is difficult to get the market value. There's no concept of blind trust. I have to discuss with the management why they're saying it so I can evaluate the reasonableness. They are saying that they have compared the carrying value with the value in use. I need to discuss the assumptions to see if that is reasonable. So I'm literally taking each element and I'm confirming it. Their future revenues are based on predictions. Of course, this must be industry data. So third party excellent evidence, I'm going to compare those predictions with industry data. Their costs are based on the average operating and capital costs after putting in the inflation rates. I need to do both. I need to compare their future predictions with historical information because obviously there would be a trend. And then I need to evaluate where they've taken the inflation rates from. They have said that they have discounted this at a rate of 1.5%. I need to check whether this is appropriate and risk has been factored in. They have a latest review and they have impairment reversals. I am going to compare this with my own understanding of the group and industry, and I am going to discuss the basis of these reversals as well. Like, has the potential to actually get the service actually changed? So as you design the procedures, it is very, very important that you confirm the information in the scenario through the options that I gave you, and you're automatically good to go. So I took this example because this was considered to be slightly difficult. When you go through this in your own time, you'll understand how this can be done. So this was like a slightly quick recap of what you can do to have a fair chance of getting really good marks in question number 1. For section B, I'm going to be covering some of the frequently asked questions which weren't covered in question number 1 or what we've just discussed. Now, quite a few of you were asking whether materiality marks are given in section B, and the answer is absolutely yes. You do have materiality marks, but please be slightly careful. It could be given in a different way. Sometimes the examiner would say materiality has been decided at 50,000. Then that's it. Do not do your own calculation, just use that. Sometimes examiner would give you the profit figure and the total asset figure. Please compare it to both. An amount might not be material to total assets, but it might be material to the profit figure, in which case it is still material. So yes, there are materiality marks, but you'll have to read the scenario to see whether I'm going to use the one that they've given or do I need to calculate this on my own. I covered this earlier as well, but this came up quite a lot. There are no marks for writing the names or numbers of your accounting or auditing standards. The accounting treatment needs to be explained, not what the name or number is. If you follow, for question number 1 in particular, if you follow the exam techniques that I spoke about, plus the ones that are there in the technical articles. So the ACCA website has excellent resources in terms of technical articles which cover exam techniques. So for AAA, as long as you're following the exam techniques, you're automatically getting the professional skills marks. So I always say, in reality, you have 3 hours and 15 minutes for an 80-mark exam because there's nothing extra that has to be done for the professional skills marks. This was another question that came up quite a bit. I'm not going to, of course, go through the topic, but I've put in the list here so you can review it later. In section B, there are questions where she gives you a scenario and they say, what are the factors that need to be communicated to those charged with governance and why? So pick up the points and explain why. So for that, you need your technical knowledge. I've made like a complete list for you to go through on your own. These are the factors that have to be communicated to those charged with governance. And using your knowledge, you'll have to explain why. I'll just pick up one as an example. So, in the question, they had mentioned that there were significant deficiencies over the approval of property, plant, and equipment. So, you'll pick this up as a matter to communicate to those charged with governance in section B. You'll say this has to be communicated because it's a significant deficiency. So it's a requirement for me to communicate it. Why do you need to communicate it? Because you need to explain what the implication for the deficiency is and what your recommendation is. Another one, very frequently tested, significant difficulties faced during the audit. This has been tested in a number of past exam questions. So we asked for the experts report. They gave it to us after 2 weeks. We were asking for further information. They kept just avoiding the question answered after 3 weeks. So again, you pick this up and say, this is a significant difficulty that we faced. It has to be communicated to those charged with governance because this affected our time and potentially the audit fee. Because it took us longer. Remember, we have an audit plan where we give you deadlines or timelines. But this was delayed because of this difficulty that we faced. So I've put together sort of almost like a 95% complete list of matters that need to be communicated. There's no need to learn this. Just read through this so that you can apply it to questions if they come up in section B. So this matters question is always in section B. Another point that I wanted to talk about, not only was this a frequently asked question, this was actually recently communicated by the examining team in the tutor conference as well, that learners are struggling with questions on group audit, where you're expected to have additional knowledge of some work that has to be done just for group audits. So the question that came up was, is there any extra preparation that I need to do? The answer is pretty much yes. Remember, in a group audit, there are all the normal problems, the normal accounting standards, risks, audit standards, but there are some additional elements. They are tested in risk questions, they're tested in quality management questions, and in completion questions as well. So please remember a few key points to keep in mind. The group auditor will set the component materiality, not the component auditor. So you should know stuff like this. You should know there are additional risks. So for example, if the question says this new component has been consolidated as a subsidiary, please don't blindly believe that. Based on the information, evaluate whether it is in reality a subsidiary. So again, of course, for group financial statements, there are additional risks. But for me, I think something that is not done very well are the factors and procedures based on relying on work of component auditor. I know you know the answer. You know, before we rely on the work of component auditor, you have to look at independence, resources, prior experience, and whether they're regulated. But if you simply write down these words, this is literally just half mark each. Look at the past exam questions. I don't have time, otherwise I would have taught this to you. It's about the matters and then the procedures. So she normally asks for procedures as well. If the matter is independence, what is the procedure to confirm independence? So go through your questions on ACCS platform to make sure you're prepared for these topics. Another one, and this is pretty much the last one that I'm going to be discussing, then I'll take the live Q&A. For other assignments, there is additional preparation needed. So for areas like forensic audit, assurance on PFI, assurance on sustainability reporting, you should know the nature, purpose, level of assurance, if any. What are the extra factors we need to consider before we accept the engagement? What are the risks particularly related to this engagement? Procedures will always be scenario specific, and how is the report made? Just to give you a very short example, when we talk about forensic audit, it is normally not an assurance engagement. So no assurance is given. So things like that, you'll have to be very careful on. The examining team is quite upset that you've not seen the 3 technical articles on sustainability assurance, and they've recently published a pass exam based on sustainability assurance, which was quite technical. It wasn't difficult, but it was slightly technical. So please make sure, because there are not many published questions on this, please make sure you review the September-December 24 pass exam question and attempt the 3 parts. And make sure when you go to AAA technical articles on ACCA's website, under other assignments, you have the 3 technical articles on sustainability right at the top. So please make sure you're prepared for that, particularly the ISSA 5000, which is the draft assurance version of your sustainability assurance standard. So just to sort of cover that you do have to prepare for other assignments separately. It's not automatically covered as a part of your audit preparation. So with this in mind, okay, not bad. So I was going to finish at 1:45. I'm now going to be taking up the question and answers. I'm going to open this up, my list, and start answering them one by one. Okay, so should we start with section A or B? How should we allocate the time? I always think you should start with section A, give it 1 hour and 45 minutes. Section B, 45 minutes for each question. This is what I recommend. That's like a personal recommendation, and it seems to work for students. In terms of time allocation, please do it for each part. So if I've allocated 1 hour, 45 minutes for question number 1, and I've taken out like 20 minutes for my reading time, for each part allocate time, I would say using the 1.5 minute rule. So for a 10-mark question, reading time is separate. I'm going to type up my answer in 15 minutes. For a 6-mark question, I'm going to type up my answer in 9 minutes. So don't just allocate time to each question, do it to each part within the question as well. If you complete the paper, you automatically have a higher chance of passing the exam. What can I do about the extreme time pressure? However much I try, I have not managed to complete the exam due to the extreme time pressure. I would highly recommend that you do written practice using the techniques that are available. See, if you have a format or a flow in mind, I need to talk about the materiality, the treatment, the risk, and the impact. You'll be more disciplined on how you answer the question. Similarly, for section B questions, when you're talking about procedures or reporting, you should know the flow of your answer so that you can answer it in that particular area. Another thing that I have always known that will help is written practice. Don't just do the mock exam and your final exam. Make sure you do as much written practice as you can. Again, you have the practice platform, which replicates the actual exam environment. Follow the techniques. So it's a combination of not spending more time than I allocated. So I had allocated 15 minutes to my part A. 15 minutes are up. I know I can write more risks, but I'm going to stop. I'll come back to this if I have time at the end. I'm going to move on to part B. So be more disciplined in your time allocation. Follow the exam techniques that are there in all the technical articles and the explainer videos, and do written practice. These 3 steps will help you manage your time. Remember, you have 3 hours, 15 minutes for an 80-mark paper. If you have the exam techniques, there's nothing extra that you need to do for professional skills. No, so very good question, Esther. You only prioritize risk of material misstatement. You get no marks for prioritizing business risks at all. So thank you for asking this. I should have mentioned this. It is only wrong that you need to prioritize, not business risk. Okay, so Pamela has asked a very good question on showing a well-developed ROM I'm sure there are technical articles and an explainer video where this has been done. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it right now because there's not enough time. But just remember, in the risk element, if you discuss more of uncertainty judgment, that automatically becomes well developed. Should we state the assertion that is being tested? No. So in advanced audit and assurance, you don't need to write the assertion. If you look at the exam technique, you just have to see assertions are automatically covered when I'm discussing the inherent risk factors. So no, you get no extra marks for talking about assertions. And you will see that the examiner does not mention the assertions in their model answers anyway. Okay, very good question. How can I evaluate my own performance? At the end of every model answer, there's a marking scheme that the examiner publishes. First, match your answer to the marking scheme to see the number of points that you might have covered or missed out on, and then go on to read the detailed answer. So when I was discussing the risks related to change in fair value of the timber plantation, this is from a past exam, did I cover the risks that are there in the model answer? So first the marking scheme and then the detailed answer, match the two, you'll have a fair idea of how well you're doing. There's no new type of ROM question. The new type of ROM question was justification of why it is a ROM, which is exactly the same as a normal ROM. So nothing different at all, just that in the risk portion, there will be more discussion points available for talking about uncertainty, complexity, judgment, etc. Okay, so this someone has attempted the exam 3 times, 45, 48, 49, and you have to do AAA UK, and therefore, how can you get to the 50 mark? It is only written practice. From 45 to 49 means you have the knowledge, you're not writing enough to get the available marks. So I know I keep saying this and I probably just sound like a broken record all the time, but it is the technique that you have to write. So you know the concern regarding fair value is judgment, but if you don't explain it properly, then you don't get marks for this. So the answer to this is written practice. So type up as many answers as you potentially can. So if you're studying with a learning part, a tuition provider, you can do it on their platform. In any case, you have ACC's practice platform, which replicates the actual exam. So just written practice over there. So with procedures, Aruj, so with procedures, you know the detailed example that I did, because that was something which was quite technical. Just follow the technique that I taught you, or not taught you, spoke about, and then it'll be there in the slides as well. So confirm the information, confirm the accounting treatment by looking for better quality evidence. All right. So if you're not looking to practice in the UK, I would recommend that you go for international. This is the answer for Shruti, who's residing in India, and you are moving to the UK. So if you're looking for having your own firm or signing audit reports, then I would say UK, otherwise international. There's not a lot of difference between the two, just like an additional topic there. So that's a very good question. If I write significant risks in the answer that are not mentioned in the marking guide, but it's valid, will you get the marks? Absolutely yes. Just remember, okay, this is something I want to sort of clarify. You can't type up the answer and at the end say, my risks have been prioritized in order of significance. That's a 0. When you're prioritizing them, and if you're putting the top 2 at the start, then you have to justify it. If I'm very honest, I do not recommend doing that. I don't want you to spend time copy pasting your answer and changing the sequence. Just answer the question the way you're comfortable. You can write the easy ones first and the difficult ones later. And like I said, at the end, just write 4 sentences as a conclusion to say this and this is prioritized because of this. So you don't have to put your answer in any sequence at all. Okay, so do you need to give a conclusion to section A and section B? So for the briefing notes conclusion, it's okay if you don't do anything about that, as long as you're doing the conclusion regarding ROM. In section B, yes. If it's an evaluation question, for example, a quality issue or an acceptance consideration, then you get extra marks for conclusion. So I've evaluated 7 factors before I accept a client, but then I have to give a conclusion to say whether I should accept it. Similarly, if it's a quality management question, you're asked to evaluate quality management issues, then yes, please give a conclusion like a summary to say this firm seems to have weak quality management systems, etc. So if it's an evaluation question, then you should give a conclusion. Okay, so Catherine has asked, do we need to study IFRS and IS in detail as required in SBR? The answer is no. If you've already studied SBR, then all of that is assumed knowledge and it's not tested at a very high level. So no, you don't have to revise any accounting standard as long as you're comfortable with the basic accounting treatments. I'll just spend another minute on answering some of the questions, then I'll hand this back to Hazel. Is reading 24 pages model answer helpful after practicing, as I find it overwhelming? I don't think there's a 24-page answer for any question. I think we're talking about the entire exam. Do it topic-wise. So, Neo, I would always say, I've typed up my answer or written it by hand, whatever you're comfortable with. I'll first go to the marking scheme. And I will make sure I've covered the topics that were there in the marking scheme. So step number 1 is, did I massively miss out on some major point? If I've covered all of them, then I go to the detailed answer and match my answer. So when they were discussing impairment, they discussed these 3 points. I could only think of one. So I know next time I need to keep this in mind as well. So do it in steps, but yes. Unfortunately, there's no way out of, reading the answer. Okay, one last question that I'll take, and then I'll just hand this back. How should we spend the rest of the time preparing for the exam? If you haven't done any written practice, I would say prioritize that and definitely take the mock exam. So ACCA has its mock exam. I also think you should do the September-December 24 exam as a mock exam, because that's like a real question that was, learners have attempted. It has the answers, everything. So at least do 200-mark questions, one as the mock exam, the other the published one, and then as much writing as you can, written practice as you can. And also please remember, there are technical articles and topic explainer videos that you can go through, which will pretty much say everything that I've just said. So everything that I said in 45 minutes, it's the same thing that is being said over and over again. So I would say pretty much that is what you need to do at this point in time. Hazel, we're already at 1:58, so I'm just going to hand this back to you.
Thank you. I do hope that everyone has just a minute to stay. Before we go, I do have a couple of things I want to cover. So I do have a quick question for you all, and I've put a quick poll on screen, and I'm hoping that you'll find it a really easy question. So I want to know if you know when the pre-June 2025 mock exams and debrief videos will be available. So if you can select your answer on screen, you've got 4 choices: the 9th of May, the 11th and 16th of May, the 9th and 16th, or are you just not sure when those resources are available? That's great. I can see some answers coming in. So when do you think that the mock and debrief that Afaf already mentioned is available for you to sit as part of your revision practice? Oh, I can see lots of emojis. That's great. I'm hoping that everyone's finding this an easy question. So I'll just give you one more minute. So it's the last chance to pick if you pick A, B, C, or D. That's great. So let's move on to see what the answer is. So the answer is the 9th and 16th, which is great to see that nearly 40% of everyone on the call has the right answer. Don't worry if you're not in that 40% and you didn't know, because now you do. And there is plenty time for you to fit this into your revision plan, as the mocks came out on Friday last week and the debrief videos are coming out Friday this week. You'll find a link in the resources on screen to find out how to access both of them. And it helps focus your studies and then gives you an important snapshot of your knowledge, and it can help you overcome exam day nerves. So just a final word on ensuring you equip yourself with the best resources in your lead up to the exam. And these are a couple of things that have already been mentioned. So you'll find links in the resources on screen to the CV practice platform, ACCA Study Resource YouTube channel, and the ACCA Study Hub. And these three platforms contain a wealth of resources that you can include in your revision, including the mocks and debriefs we've just mentioned, practice tests, topic explainer videos that Faf mentioned, online study texts, quizzes, and practice questions, as she was saying, is so important to do. So before you leave today's webinar, make sure you save those links and use them in preparing for your exam. So I do need to bring things to a close, and I hope you found today's session very useful. As I mentioned at the start, because you've registered for this webinar, you will receive an email tomorrow with the recording so you can listen to it all again. Thank you, Afaf, for your extending your support today, and also to the team behind the scenes that have helped deliver the session successfully. And finally, thank you to all of you joining today, and we wish you all the best when it's time to sit your exam. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.